it's about time mediocre white men like myself listen for a change.
Well, I'm not sure you're a mediocre, and
well,
I know you're not white.
Right, exactly. Thank you.
You're an average light-skinned male, but you're not a mediocre white man.
Thank you.
That makes sense to you?
Yes, thank you.
And you need to remember that in order, male is what we call men. In order to make a word that talks about women, we added the chemical symbol for iron to the word male to get female. Fe is the chemical symbol for iron. So you add iron to that other group and you got something new and different. And strong. And strong, because we will outlive you. Most of the men watching this will die 20 or more years before their wives will. And I know that because mine did, and I'm really angry. Anyway, okay, now I turn into a soup sandwich. No, go. What's your next question?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I guess my next question is what I was watching this video by Martin Luther King Jr. talking about riots as the language of the unheard. And on some level, these protests feel wonderful. They feel like needed, and we need to wake up. And otherwise, we're just going to, you know, Martin Luther King Jr. was talking about what we're going through now, like 60 years ago. And we have to stop, you know.
Frederick Douglass talked about it before Martin Luther King Jr. did. Frederick Douglass said, if there is no struggle, there is no progress. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Find out what any people will quietly submit to, and you will have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them. And these will continue until they are resisted with either words or blows or with both. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters.
Exactly.
What those people did this week, you could have learned, you could have expected if you would study what Frederick Douglass said, and that was a long time before Martin Luther King Jr.
Well, according to our president, Frederick Douglass is alive. You remember that?
Yes, he says he talked to Frederick Douglass. It's like when he went to Puerto Rico and he said, he called the person in Puerto Rico and he said, I've talked to your president. And she said, Mr. Trump, you are our president.
Right. Not in his view.
We are talking about ignorance here. Ignorance at the highest level. Our commander-in-chief, ignorant in the extreme, and we need to realize that and not allow that to continue for 4 more years. We must not allow this to happen.
Jane, in our remaining minutes, can you tell us a little bit about that time with Martin Luther King Jr.? I know you loved him, and how your work started with your students.
Yeah, I will, but I don't want to, because every time I think about that, I do turn into a soup sandwich, because that was I watched my little sister die when I was 10 and she was 3. And I watched my father mourn that, and I thought that was the worst thing that could happen to me. Right. And then Martin Luther King Jr. was killed. And he had, for me, he represented hope. And for me, hope is an acronym for holding on to positive energy. And that's what he did. He was one of our heroes of the month in February in my 3rd grade classroom, along with George Washington, who owned slaves, bought and sold people for money. Abraham Lincoln, who refused to free the slaves until he absolutely had to. Daniel Boone, who was famous for taking Native American land and calling it his own. And Davy Crockett, who was killed as he tried to kill Mexicans as we tried to take over part of their land. Right. And those were our heroes of the month in February, along with Martin Luther King Jr. That was racist teaching, but I wouldn't have agreed that it was racist teaching because I swore that I would never act like a racist, but I was, because I didn't recognize what a racist looked like. And what a racist looks like is somebody who used the Mercator projection map and who teaches that Columbus discovered America. We were studying the Indian unit at that time because kids get real antsy in the springtime and they want to get out of the room. So you teach them something and you involve them in something that's interesting. And what was interesting was Native Americans. We called them Indians because that's what Christopher Columbus called them. Come on, they weren't. He hadn't reached India, but he couldn't think of another word. Okay, so we're studying the Indian unit. We were going to put up the teepee that my previous year's 3rd graders had made. the next day, and we were going to paint it with Indian symbols chosen by white folks, read Indian poetry written by white folks, sing Indian songs written by white folks, and learn the Sioux Indian prayer that says, "Oh, Great Spirit, keep me from ever judging a man until I've walked a mile in his moccasins," which was taught to the Indians by a white missionary. So I had the teepee under my arm. I walked into my front door. The telephone was ringing. I answered it. It was my sister. She said, "Jane, do you have the television on?" "No." "You better turn it on." "Why?" "Because they shot him." And I said, "Who'd we shoot this time?" Because we were in a shooting mood. We shot anybody who disagreed with us or who said there's a better way. And then she said, "Martin Luther King Jr." And for a moment, the world stopped turning for me. That was a horrible, terrible disaster, because he was trying to make the world, the country, a better place for everybody, not just for Black people. I was just sick. And so I turned on the television. I fed the kids. I got them to bed. I washed and dried the teepee. I laid it out on the living room floor. I was ironing it. And Walter Cronkite came on, and he was talking to 3 leaders of the Black community. And he said to those 3 Black males, "When our leader was killed, his widow held us together. Who's going to keep your people in line?" And I thought, oh my God, it's us and them. If Walter Cronkite thinks that way, oh my God. So I changed the channel. And there was Dan Rather saying to 3 leaders of the Black community, "Don't you Negroes think you should feel sympathy for us white people, because we can't feel the anger at this killing that you Negroes can?" And at that point, I rolled up the teepee. I threw it into the closet. I got my husband's supper ready, because he worked nights at the Oliver tractor plant at that time. And I decided at that point that the next day, not only was I going to teach my children that Sioux Indian prayer, I was going to arrange to have it answered for them, because I was going to do what we do in this society.
To walk a mile quote, "I walked a mile."
"Oh, Great Spirit, keep me from ever judging a man until I've walked a mile in his moccasins." I was going to do what we do in this society. I was going to pick out a group of people on the basis of a physical characteristic over which they had absolutely no control. I was going to assign characteristics to them, either positive or negative, depending on that particular physical characteristic. I was going to treat them as though all the negative things and the positive things I was saying about them were absolutely true. I was going to force one group to live down to my expectations of them. I was going to force the other group, encourage the other group to live up to my expectations of them. And I was going to let them find out how it feels to be treated that way 24/7 in the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Right.
Where we have liberty and justice for all, right, which we don't.
No.
I didn't know how this would work. If I had known how it would work, I probably wouldn't have done it. If I had known that my children were going to be beaten, spit on, that their belongings were going to be destroyed, that they were going to be mentally and physically abused by their peers, by their teachers, and by the parents of their peers, because they had, well, to this day, for 20% of the people in that community, an N-word lover for a mother. If I had known that was going to happen, I wouldn't have done the exercise. If I had known that that my parents would lose their business, they had a restaurant in a little hotel that we owned. The day before I did the exercise, they sold a whole bunch of food. The day after it, they sold none.
Wow.
People would not eat in the restaurant that was owned by the people who raised the town's only N-word lover. If I had known that no teacher would speak to me for 12 years in that system after I did that exercise, because I made them look at themselves in a new way. If I'd known that was going to happen, I probably would have done it sooner, because I found out I had a whole lot more time to teach when I was no longer included in their hall conferences, and my internal environment was a lot less polluted when I no longer had to listen to their racist, sexist, homophobic, ethnocentric statements. But I didn't know. So that night when I went to bed, I said the only prayer I was saying at that time, "Oh Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Oh Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace, oh God." I said it over and over like a mantra. I learned something really valuable from the following weeks and the following years. Be careful what you pray for. You might get it. And you might find out that was exactly what you did not want. I wanted to be accepted in that community. I wanted my father to understand what I was doing and to support me for it and reinforce it. I wanted my mother to do the same thing. My father did. My mother, after my father died, my father kicked me out of the family and said, "Don't come over here anymore. Nobody's comfortable when you're around." Since you did that blue-eyed, brown-eyed thing, you had ruined our reputation in this community. Well, I felt bad about that for about half an hour. And then I thought, you fool, there are only 1,000 people in that community, and only 20% of them are as ignorant as your mother. Get over it. So that didn't bother me. After that, that didn't bother me anymore. And it made my husband really happy because he didn't have to be around her anymore. So there was, you know, there were some real positives to these negatives. Right. But I went into my classroom the next day and I separated my students according to the color of their eyes. And I was shocked at how quickly they became what I told them they were. I will never forget little brown-eyed Debbie when I said blue-eyed people aren't as smart as brown-eyed people. They aren't as clean as brown-eyed people. They aren't as civilized as brown-eyed people. And little brown-eyed Debbie sitting, and I have blue eyes, little brown-eyed Debbie sitting in the front row looked up at me and said, how come you're the teacher here if you've got them blue eyes? That quickly, that kid knew how to attack the color of my eyes and the words to use to put me in my place. I thought what my third graders did that day was absolutely awful, what they did to one another, what the brown-eyed people were willing to do to the blue-eyed people, and what the blue-eyed people had to do and had to take it. I thought it was just childish reactions. I went down to the teacher's lounge at noon. I was feeling really bad. Some horrible things were happening in my classroom. Kids were treating each other in an absolutely unloving way. And I went into the teacher's lounge. There were about 10 teachers in the teacher's lounge. The other two third grade teachers were in there. One of them was probably maybe 54 at the time, and the other was over 60. They had been molding young minds for many years, and I told them what was happening in my classroom. When I finished telling them what was happening, the younger of those two teachers said, I don't know how you have time for all that extra stuff. It's all I can teach: reading, writing, and arithmetic. Well, she hadn't taught reading, writing, and arithmetic yet. She might as well have done the extra stuff. And the other one, over 60 years old, molding young minds for over 30 years. And she said to me, on the day after Martin Luther King Jr. was killed, I don't know why you're doing that. I thought it was about time somebody shot that son of a bitch. Yeah. No teacher shook her head. No teacher gasped. Nobody said, Helen, do you realize what you just said? Yeah. Every one of those so-called educated educators smiled and nodded because she had expressed their feelings perfectly. And as the oldest member of the group, she had the most right to do so. I went back to my classroom determined that no student of any age will ever leave my presence with those attitudes unchallenged. I may not be able to change your attitude, but I can challenge your attitude. And you have to prove to me that white people are superior, so-called white people are superior to everybody else on the face of the earth. And you can't do it because it isn't true.
Right.
We've got to realize that we do not talk about the inventions, the creations that people of color have created in this country. And when I pull up to a stoplight in Osage, Iowa, and there I am in my car, a little old white, so-called white, little old woman, and I look up at the trucker in a big old semi, and he's because he's in a hurry, he's on schedule. I look up and I smile, and he smiles back, and I know he's thinking, oh, she loves me. No, I'm thinking, if you knew that your behavior was governed right now by a traffic light that was invented by a black man, you'd run that light. You know he would, and I know he would. I sit there and I smile at him and I think, you fool. If he knew when he puts on his heavy work boots in the morning that he wouldn't have those if it hadn't been for a black man who invented the last so that you could have cheaply made, quickly made shoes, he'd find something else to wear, or he'd come up with an invention of his own, which he won't, because the things that we need are all there already, most of them, because of the contributions made by people of color that we refuse to admit.
Right. Yeah, and we don't teach in school.
Of course not. Of course not. We have to support the myth of the rightness of whiteness. So we talk only about the wonderful things that white males have provided for us. Now, hopefully, schools aren't doing that anymore, but I don't see evidence that they aren't. Except yesterday, and day before yesterday, and yesterday, the day before that, I saw lots of people of different color groups and different religions and different gender orientations and different opinions. I saw them in the street, absolutely infuriated by what the networks seem to think is a good thing to put on every half hour. It's time for us to say on the networks, people need to say, if you want to see the clip of Mr. George being killed, go Google it. But we are not showing that on this network anymore because it looks like what we're trying to do is intimidate young black males and their mothers. It looks like what we're trying to say to them is this is what will happen to you if you get out of line. Now, maybe, I know most people don't see it that way. Most people are seeing it as how awful that is, and we have to show how awful it is. No, we have to realize that every time you do that, you are nailing a coffin in the self-respect of people of color, particularly black men and their mothers and fathers in this country. We'd better find a better way.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for that. Let me ask you a question. When you did this exercise with Debbie and all her classmates, your dear pupils, and you saw them change so quickly in both directions, how did you end? I mean, we have the videos, and let's put that link in there again in the sidebar, but how did you end that exercise to teach them or unteach them what they had just manifested?
The same way we could end this exercise that we have been using based on skin color in this country. I told them at the end of the day, boys and girls, I lied to you today. Blue-eyed people aren't smarter. At the end of the second day, I didn't tell that at the end of the first day, but at the end of the second day, I said, boys and girls, I lied to you yesterday on Friday and today. People with brown eyes are no better or worse than people with blue eyes. This exercise is over. And every one of those kids started crying, and so did I. And they all got together and hugged one another.
Oh.
And for the rest, I'm telling you, you have no idea how powerful it is to force a person to see the truth and then to realize that there's a cure for it. There's a cure for racism. It's called ignorance. It's called seeing people as truly human beings, your cousins. I have a picture of those kids hugging one another because then, not those kids, but another group, a friend of mine who's a professional photographer came in and filmed when that group got together, the second, third group that we did it with. And they just want so much to get it back together. And the day after that exercise is over, a whole new attitude appears in a classroom. Kids would not allow other people, in fact, they wouldn't allow other teachers to be ignorant. They came in from recess after that and said that, and one of the other teachers, the other third grade teachers on the playground duty. And they said, and they were really upset. I said, what's going on here? That other teacher doesn't do anything when we do something wrong. She doesn't do a thing about it. But when that one group does something wrong, she really gets on them. She's discriminating against those kids. And somebody ought to tell her she's discriminating. I thought, I had to say, I'll talk to the principal. I'll see what I can do. Because those kids their eyes were open and they recognized it when they saw it. One of my third grade students and others came to me in the summer and said, I want to thank you for what you've done for my daughter. I said, what did I do for your daughter? She said, my mothers-in-law, you know how they are. Every time she comes to the house, she uses the N-word. And I wish she would stop it. And now she has, because my daughter walked up to her the last time she was in the house and she said, Grandma, we don't use that word in our house. And if you're going to keep on using it, I'm going to go outside until you go home. Now, I didn't teach that kid much about respect for her elders. But I did teach her about elders that you can respect. And you can't respect elders after you learn the truth about race and racism. You can't do it. I remember when my sister was substituting at the junior high, and the English teacher came down to the lunchroom, and she was just to the teacher's lounge. And she was just furious. She said, I don't know what to do. And my sister said, what's going on? She said, well, I use the N-word in the classroom. And one of those students said, we don't use that word in this school. And if you're going to keep on using it, I'm going to go out in the hall until you stop. She said to my sister, what would you have done? And my sister said, well, I guess I'd quit using that particular word. That had never occurred to that so-called teacher. That woman is a teacher, not an educator. Right. Teachers train people. Educators lead people out of ignorance. There's a huge difference.